Hello, my dearest students. In today's video, we're going to learn the story Oliver Asked for More, which is actually an excerpt from the story Oliver Twist, written by Charles Dickens. So, this is the story about the miserable life of the poor people in England and how the rich did inhuman treatment to the poor. So, let's begin. Among other buildings in a town in England, there was a house for poor people who had no money and nowhere to live. This was called the workhouse. So, in England, there was a building where people who had no money to make ends meet or who had no shelter over their head could go. That is called the workhouse. So, it was a place for the impoverished people. So here, make ends meet means जो दो वक्त की रोटी भी नहीं कमा सके, and impoverished people means poor people. Oliver Twist was born in a workhouse. So the protagonist in the story is Oliver Twist. His mother, a young woman, lay ill in bed. So she was sick. A doctor and an old woman stood by her side. She lifted her head from the pillow. Let me see the child and die, she said. So she knew she was in her deathbed and that she would pass away soon. Oh, you mustn't talk about dying yet, said the doctor. So don't talk about passing away. You are a very young woman. No, dear, said the old woman. You are too young to die. So don't talk about passing away. You just gave birth to your child. The young woman shook her head and held out her hand towards the child. The doctor put the child in her arms. She pressed her cold white lips to its face and then fell back. So when her lips are white and pale, it shows that she is nearly going to die. She is dead, said the doctor. So the doctor proclaimed her dead. Yes, poor dear, said the old woman, and she took the child away from its dead mother. Poor dear. So she's feeling sympathetic that the mother had to pass away, but here they have written its dead mother. So for the child, they're not even calling the child him. They're treating it like an object. She was a good-looking girl, said the doctor, as he put on his hat and gloves. Where did she come from? So as the doctor was about to leave, he said, where did she come from? So the old woman said, she was brought here last night. She was lying in the street and she had walked a long way and her shoes had holes in them. So her shoes was worn out. That means she had traveled a lot of distance in those shoes. Nobody knows where she came from or where she was going. So nobody knew about her. The doctor raised the dead woman's left hand. The usual story, he said. So what is the usual story? That women are single mothers. I see that she has no ring on her finger. She wasn't married. So he's saying she wasn't married, but yet she conceived a child. And he leaves. He went home to his dinner, so the doctor left. The old woman sat down on a chair in front of the fire and began to dress the baby. She dressed him in the very old clothes used for babies. So usually babies are given new and clean clothes. But unfortunately here, the baby was dressed in tattered and shabby ragged clothes, who were born in the workhouse. The child was an orphan, born into a world which had no love or pity for him. No one was able to discover who the baby's father was or what his mother's name was. So the identity of the parents were not available. Mr. Bumble, an important officer in the town, invented a name for the baby. He chose the name Oliver Twist, so the name was given by Mr. Bumble. We name the new babies here in order from A to Z. So the children were named alphabetically. He explained when people asked. I named the last one Swooble. This one is Twist. So the next one will be Unwin. So if you see here, no much thought is given before the child is given a name. They are just named alphabetically like it is some object. At the age of 9, Oliver was a pale and thin child. He and the other workhouse boys never had enough warm clothes or food. So this shows that the children lived in wretched conditions. They were given only 3 meals of thin soup every day. On Sundays, they had a small piece of bread. So if you see, they weren't given enough food. That is why the boys there had become pale and thin. So just a meager amount of food was given, just enough for sustenance. They were fed in a big hall. A large pot stood at one end of the room, and the soup was served by the master. Each boy had one small bowl of soup and no more. The bowls never needed washing because the boys cleaned them with their spoons until they shone. So inadequate or insufficient food was provided to them, which was only a small bowl of soup. So they cleaned the soup with their spoon until they shine because they were still hungry. One day, Oliver and his friends decided that one boy would walk up to the master after supper and ask for more soup. Oliver was chosen. So Oliver was chosen as the scapegoat because it was everyone's idea, but he was going to be reprimanded or he would have to face the consequences. In the evening, the boys sat down at the tables. The master stood by the pot and the soup was served. It disappeared quickly. The boys whispered and made signs to Oliver to go ahead and ask for more soup. He stood up from the table and went to the master with his bowl and spoon in his hand. Please, sir, he said, I want more. I want some more. So the boys were still famished. They were hungry. And therefore he asked for more soup. The master was a fat and healthy man. So if you see here, the master was well fed. But the children in the workhouse had to go through a hard and merciless life. But he went very pale because he couldn't believe the audacity of the boy to actually ask for more. He looked with surprise at the small boy. What? Said the master at last in a quiet voice. Please, sir, repeated Oliver. I want some more. The master hit Oliver with his spoon, then seized him and cried for help. So he called the other people, saying, see what Oliver is asking. Mr. Bumble rushed into the room and the master told him what Oliver had said. He asked for more? Mr. Bumble cried. I cannot believe it. They couldn't believe their eyes that someone had asked for more. One day they will hang the boy, they said, for his actions, for going against them. He took Oliver away and shut him in a dark room. So he was imprisoned in a dark room. So it was a very harsh punishment. The next morning, a notice appeared on the workhouse gate. 5 pounds were offered to anybody who would take Oliver Twist. They said, we don't want a boy who will voice his opinion and be a threat to them. So, 5 pounds were offered to anybody who were willing to take Oliver Twist away. Oliver was a prisoner in that cold, dark room for a whole week. So, for an entire week, he was imprisoned in that cold, dark room. Every morning, he was taken outside to wash, and Mr. Bumble beat him with a stick. So, he was beaten black and blue with a stick. Then he was taken into the large hall where the boys had their soup. Mr. Bumble beat him in front of everybody. So this was to teach a lesson to everyone that this is the consequences of anybody's action if they voice their opinion. He cried all day. When night came, he tried to sleep, but he was cold, lonely, and frightened. Yes, he was put in a dark room. So obviously, he would be lonely and frightened because he was only a tender age of 9 years. But one day, outside the high workhouse gate, Mr. Bumble met Mr. Sowerberry. So Mr. Sowerberry was a tall, thin man who wore black clothes and made coffins. So coffin is into which people were put into, and that casket was then buried in the ground. Many of his coffins were for the poor people who had died in the workhouse. So he says, I have prepared the coffins for the two women who died last night, he said to Mr. Bumble. So I have prepared and the coffins are ready. Good, said Mr. Bumble, you will be rich one day. So the reason why he said you will be rich one day is because there are so many women who die because of this dreadful condition. So he will have a lot of orders to make these coffins and hence he will be rich. That is a very sad situation. So if you see how these rich people or how the affluent classes actually treated these downtrodden people like objects, like they have no emotions towards these poor people. Do you know anybody who wants a boy on 5 pounds? He raised his stick and pointed to the notice on the gate. So the life of a boy who is born in a workhouse is worth just 5 pounds. So this is a really poignant story which reminds us about the disparity that happens in the society, and also that children of a tender age require love, affection, and care, and not to be treated like objects. After this, I would recommend you to solve the multiple choice questions that I have uploaded. I'll be adding the link. If you haven't subscribed, do it right now, because I believe if you watch all the relevant videos that I have uploaded, nothing can stop you from achieving great marks. God bless and thank you.